Hello everyone, this is Quantillion and welcome to a new video. In this video I will describe behind the scenes how I've created this piece if you've seen it on my Instagram account, which is Deep Sea Within. This is a spin-off similar to last week's tutorial. Last week was a Under the Spot where I've highlighted new features in Nomad Sculpt. However, in this week, I'll take you behind the scene, and the objective is to give you inspiration to show you that everything you need is here between your hand, and you might utilize your iPad in a way that you have never thought about before. So this is to give you inspiration and motivation so you can go forward. So the piece that you see in here is Deep Sea Within, and I've created it totally on the iPad. Parts of it, or most of it, was created in Nomad Sculpt, and there is a bit where I have used other apps such as Shapr3D and Procreate, and in here I will show you the different elements, how I have tackled them, and how I end up with this piece together, directly exported from the iPad. Now, if you stick until the end, I will also show you an animation with sound that I have created on the iPad for your own enjoyment. So let's start with the piece in general. Let me get the Nomad Sculpt app opened, and in here I have Nomad Sculpt here. I'll give you a little bit of behind the scene inspiration. So what has inspired me? I do believe that inspiration can be found everywhere. The most important bit is that you need to pay attention and you need to interpret that into your own thoughts to be able to express it. So this is the piece, as you can see from the iPad Nomad Sculpt, which looks a little bit different, but it's still the same details with a little bit of different lighting. So my inspiration for this piece came from a novel I was reading at that time, and that novel is by one of my favorite writer, who's Michael Crichton, and the name of the novel is Sphere, and it is about a subnautica trip or adventure for a group of people, including a psychologist, and the way that they interact with their fear. And at one point, one of them, their fear was manifested as a squid, and that's what you see in here. Now, before I start working on any piece, I try to interpret it and think of it from my perspective. And looking into it, I am into space, as you probably have seen on my Instagram and in my avatar here. But one sentence which lingered with me long time before is that the first encounter that human would have with aliens is actually here. So we need to look within, and they are referring to different type of animals and different region of undiscovered places, especially under the sea. So in this plot, the psychologist and the group of people goes into the Pacific Ocean to investigate and examine an alien ship, and this alien ship was sinking deep down in the sea. So it's a subnautica themed novel. I looked a little bit about squids, and I did a little bit of study before starting the actual sculpting of squid. Now, what are squids? I looked into different things. So squids, for example, one of the important information is that squids and octopus are different. And the differences between them is that squids are part of an order, which you can see in here is Ogopsida, which is a part of a class which is a cephalopoda. And excuse me if I am not pronouncing these correctly. I don't have a biology background. I'm very interested in biology, and having this information is very intriguing for me. So before starting to sculpt this squid, what I have managed to do is look for references and read a little bit about it. And this one was the reference I have mostly impacted by. So for example, I didn't know that the giant squid still exist, and they are not in any way near extinction. They live in the deep sea, so under the sea we don't see them. The only way that scientists have known they still exist is from the peaks they have found in sperm whale. Now they are predators, and whales also are predators, and they feed on them. There's a kind of correlation between human and squids. So I've started reading about that before trying to draw and sculpt what you see in here. One of the information, for example, that I found it interesting is that female squid are larger than male squid, and usually they can go up to 12 meters. One interesting fact is how they actually swim, and it's all based on like propeller impact or jetting, and it's all happening with their muscle tension. So looking into different kind of references is one way of how you could actually understand your piece and try to work with it. And to do so, I've looked for images, and I've started with blocking, and that blocking is usually the first step you need in order for you to start working on any piece. So in here I will show you one of my earliest model of the squid, and if you think about the final, it looks very finished, but you need to see that this is how it started. And if I want to explain each of these elements, now from my study and reading about squids, I understand that they need to have 8 tentacles, if that's the actual word, and in order to create them, what I've done is I've just created tubes, and these tubes have different thicknesses, and these thicknesses has different angles. Now for the body itself, I have decided to go with a sphere and then a little bit of sculpting another distorted sphere. And for the tip or the head here, the crown, let's call it, for the crown I've used the triplanar. I have merged these both, and then I came back to coloring this, painting it, adding noise, adding imperfection, using one specific brush which looks like a ring in order to show the ring on these mantles or tentacles. And I end up with a pretty much solid squid. Now this squid is ready to go to the environment. So I've taken the squid into the environment and I've started experimenting with lighting on it. But in order for, so this is also one of the early version, in order for the squid to appear giant. Now of course in the novel the squid is exaggerated, so it's a little bit bigger than 12 meters if it's a female, or 10 meters if it was male. So in order to communicate this kind of scale, it is important to have a human character. So I needed to create my human character, which is the diver that you see in here. This is the same diver, and I have copied him and cloned him, changing a little bit of the angle so it looks a little bit different. And to do so, the diver in here, if you think about it, I don't need much of a detail, so any low polygon diver would do it. And this is my diver, and looking into it, it's a sphere with a cube, and then I would have the tubes and a little bit of work. What I'm really happy with is the actual wire frame. If you look into it, you can see clearly that the geometry here is very much optimized, and that's something I need for my scene, because the more elements I have, and if they are so much detailed, I wouldn't be able to export them easily or work with them, even with Nomad Sculpt, even if I have the newest or the latest iPad. So tube, again cylinder, and that's it. Once I have it, I saved that as a diver, and then I brought it again into Nomad Sculpt, of where you could start seeing that I have positioned them in a way that allow this scale to happen. Now, usually when you're working in an environment piece, and I think this is a rule, so it's not created by me, you always need to work in 3 layers. That's how you want to think of your environment. So in here, my mid layer, which is the focal point or the focus of attention, is where the squid and the divers reside. In order to highlight that, what I've done is that I've used a spotlight, because spotlights allow nicer shadow that can be used as soft. And in order to highlight the squid itself, I've used another one going all the way from down. This is with regarding to the mid layer, as I was talking about. Now, what happened to the foreground and background? For the foreground, I thought I need to create a kind of habitat. I think the name of the habitat in the novel is DH8. And as you can see, it started with a very simple, not detailed blocks. And this is exactly what I'm saying when we talk about blocking. Now, in order to have this geometry that is so much refined and, as you can see, very much optimized, it is a little bit hard to achieve in Nomad Sculpt, especially if you want to have center to center and other elements that are aligned to lines. So thinking about it, I thought that the best thing to do is to actually do it in another app. And in here, where I've used Shapr3D, which is also part of my workflow. So reading a little bit about Habitat or Deep Sea Habitat, and me being a fan of a game, if you're aware of Subnautica, you can see that most of the habitat are somehow elevated. And the reason they are elevated is because it will eliminate the shear of the waves. I mean, you might say, or wind. You might say that there is no waves or wind. Well, actually there is. Seas or underseas or ocean operate as the outside environment. So it has its own currents, it has its own rivers, and having this eliminated would allow this to have a little bit of a shake, and this would solve the integrity of the structure. Well, enough talking about the architecture of the habitat. You can see that I've started with the very basic shapes, connect them, and then export this as a STL file or an OBJ, and then you can bring it back to Nomad Sculpt. And this is what you see in here. Now, one advice for you, in order to start sculpting and working on the habitat or any object that you are importing from another software, you need to remesh it. Now, if I remesh this using the normal remesh tool, which is the one available under voxel remeshing, you would see that this would corrupt the geometry. Or if it's not corrupting it, I need higher details, which would make this model very dense and high to work with on Nomad Sculpt. So you might ask me, Quantilian, so how to do it? Well, the way to do it in here is to use global remeshing. So global remeshing works a little bit different. I could talk a little bit about that in a later video, but generally speaking, global remeshing try to keep any empty or holes as they are and try to use the surfaces as they are to point the meshes, rather than the voxel remeshing. What it does is it looks as the whole geometry and start dividing it. So using global remeshing, I managed to have this brought to the scene. And while I was in this scene, I thought that, okay, there are some things you need to be aware of about the habitat. So for example, there is a watertight chamber where the divers goes in and they close behind them, and then this allow the water to go down. So I thought this is something I need to bring. Also, reading through the novel, the habitat was A, B, C, E, oh, it's A, B, C, D, E, and F. And I thought this would be brilliant. So using the technique I've showed you before, from alphas from A to F, I was able to put together these different lettering. Also, for the details, I've used voxels, or in front vertices brushes, and a little bit of noise and a little bit of defined science fiction. So while I was working on it, I was thinking thoroughly. One inspiration came from Subnautica, which is happening in here. So what is this big rectangular building? So usually if you have an undersea vessel, you would need this to somewhere to park, if you might think of it. So it goes underneath here, it goes up and allow the divers to leave. You might also see that the scale of the diver here is a little bit big in comparison to the actual habitat. Well, that was on purpose, because if you want to look into my composition, so I use different views, and this is the latest view. You can see that I wanted to show this closer. I don't have much of a distance, so a scale could work with it. So the habitat was completed by integrating a model from Shapr3D. The octopus was done totally in Nomad Sculpt. I started reading a little bit about undersea environment. So you would see that it is dominated by sands. There is also corals, so coral reef, but it is not alive, because apparently back in the days we have the sea level lower. So at one time this could be a beach, you never know. And now it is dead, and what we end up with is these fossils. So I've started sculpting some of these fossils. What I did is I've looked for a free to use image for this kind of coral. I added this as an alpha and I started drawing. I only did one, and all what you see here is a copy and somehow re-layouting of that one. Now this is done for the foreground and the background. Now the third is for the midground and the foreground. Now we need to look into the background. The background itself need to be a giant alien ship, and this is also again coming from the novel. And the way I thought about it is, I don't need to pay much attention and much details. I need to show a fin, and I think that was a description in the actual novel, and part of the cylinder of this ship. And anyhow, if we go back into the view and put the focus on, you can see that it is out of focus, so a detail is not that important. So to summarize what I was talking about before, found a good inspiration, do a little bit of research, try to interpret the meaning. So for example, for me, the meaning of squid is an alien that is neighbor to us. An alien, by the way, a fact that was emerged from the Jurassic period. So it's one of the ancient animals. And I couldn't find a clear photo of it, which also makes me wonder, do we need to go to space to find aliens? We might need to reflect on what we have now and look for aliens within us. We might be the aliens anyhow for this planet, so you never know. So after doing a little bit of research and having your references such as photo, blocking is the most important bit. And as you can see, the process of blocking happened in the squid, and then details followed. Blocking happened for the habitat, and blocking happened for the diver. Now the diver itself, if you look at it, it's still in the blocking phase. And again, the reason is we don't need too much details for it. It would only show as a dot or a few pixels in the overall page. And then you need to think about your composition in terms of what's in foreground, the midground, which is my focus in this piece, and the background, which is the ship that you see beyond. For the lighting, after bringing all this element together and being happy with it, I've experimented with a little bit of the post process. So you would have the max samples on, the quality on, reflection SSR would be nice to show a little bit of the reflection that's happening in my habitat. Ambient occlusion is important as well to show some of these shadows, because these shadows could not be casted by light, as you probably can see. I think there is another light which I have not mentioned, but it is as 0, which is a light that's coming from behind. So the environment or the HDR itself provided me with enough light to start working with. Going into the depth of field to show this variation between the background and the foreground, and my octopus is the object. You can see there is a floating element here, and this is a small cone. I don't think anyone have noticed it, and the reason I wanted to give this a little bit of shininess, I started with this and then I honestly ditched it, forgot about it, and when it was time to export it, I got back to it and I left it. I thought it's always nice to have these kind of happy accidents. Once you have all this in place, now it's time to look into lighting and material. Of course, I've decided my squid to be red, so I did a little bit of research about colors, and apparently if you think of colors, I'm not sure if I can demonstrate this in here. I might be able to demonstrate in Procreate. The opposite color in the color wheel of the red from the other side would be green, so it's not blue, especially the red that I'm using. So I thought blue is a little bit of cliche, so let's move into something else. And in here I have brought the green color that you would see for my final piece in. And once that is done, I'm almost ready to export. I just put my iPad in a portrait mode and export it, because my aim to provide an image that I could share on my Instagram account. Once that is done and all is exported, now it is time to do a little bit of post-processing, and in here where Procreate came in handy. So let me show you this simple processing that I have followed, and then I can talk a little bit about what I've done and how these are done. So mentioned before that the best colors to work with when you have red to show the opposite. If I want to show you this on a color wheel here, you can see that this red and this is the green, so it is the opposite. I'm sure there is a terminology that I'm not familiar with, or I'm familiar with but I don't remember it, but that's where I thought a green would be a better export than any of the previous one, which is blue. Now, to show this in a more of a dramatic way, nothing shows a better dramatic light rather than those God's rays, and now we're in ocean. In reality, this would not show as this, because simply we are way down in the sea, deep down in the sea, that we can't see them, but you can get away with it. Now, there's a mask attached to it because I don't want the ray to have this kind of sharp line that you see in here, even though that could be a very stylistic way. And then finally, I started looking into bringing some elements into my foreground. So you can see I've started adding this image, which also I found as a Creative Commons license, and brought it, make it black and white, added it with as an overlay, and then put a layer mask just to remove these kind of noises that might interfere with the composition. And finally, the most important bit is having a little bit of an overlay, and this overlay with a specific color that is blue, and this is what allows this green to show and the red to show and provide you with this undersea color. Now, I've experimented also with having another layer, but this was too blue for me, so I ended up with this as my final work. So this would be the whole process, the behind scenes or behind of the scenes regarding creating deep sea within. Again, just to recap, always have a good inspiration, look for references, block your elements, work on your composition in terms of foreground, midground, background. Use colors for your advantage, and of course you would come back later to refine by adding some of these small details like the bubbles that you see in here, the God's rays impact. Of course, the bloom gave this also a little bit of a nice, and I also failed to talk about the impact, which is this border, black vignette, if that's the word, for my image. That would be it for today. I hope you would have completed the whole video, and I hope you have enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you want to see more of these behind the scene to inspire you, and I'm really happy to do them. Also, thank you all for your subscription, for considering the subscription, for sharing this with your peers, for all the comments and all the positive feedbacks and love. Big heart from me, and I'll see you in the next video. I mentioned that if you stick until the end, I will show you an animation with audio where you can see what I have completed again on the iPad. So I leave you with that until we meet next week, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye now.